I want you to take a second and just try to visualize a very specific scene for me. Imagine you were walking through the absolute center of modern-day Thessaloniki in Greece. Specifically, picture yourself standing right in the middle of Hippodrome Square.
Right, which is just a classic bustling urban space today.
Yeah, exactly. If you were to look around on, say, a typical Tuesday morning, you would see a perfectly mundane, everyday urban environment. You have these classic, densely packed 1960s and 1970s apartment buildings towering all around you.
Complete with those characteristic wraparound balconies.
Oh, yeah, usually draped with laundry or, packed with potted plants. And down at street level, it's just this maze of tightly packed, parked cars. So dense, it honestly defies the laws of physics that anyone ever actually pulls out of a spot.
It really does.
And you're surrounded by hurried pedestrians, people clutching their iced coffees, rushing off to work or school. To the naked eye, there is absolutely nothing unusual about this space. I mean, it is just another busy city block.
There's not a single obvious marker anywhere.
Right, nothing that betrays the massive, heavy history resting just inches beneath the asphalt you're standing on.
It really functions as the ultimate urban camouflage. We navigate these modern concrete corridors completely oblivious to the fact that the topography of a contemporary city acts as a geological blanket. It's covering up layers of unimaginable historical weight. And that is really the central mission for our deep dive today.
Which I am so excited for.
Yeah, we are going to mentally excavate what we can really only describe as an invisible giant, the ancient Roman Hippodrome of Thessaloniki. And what's fascinating here is the methodology we're using to look at the sources.
Right, the way we're structuring this.
Exactly. We're going to structure this narrative strictly as a timeline, tracking a single geographical coordinate. We're going to explore how this exact specific footprint of land transformed physically and psychologically over millennia.
It's wild, starting as an awe-inspiring imperial monument.
Morphing into a massive slaughterhouse.
Yeah, and then completely transitioning into a bustling Ottoman textile hub.
Later becoming ground zero for a modern earthquake tragedy.
And finally, reconciling itself as a modern repository of urban memory.
That chronological structure is really what makes this so compelling. We are basically watching the canvas stay exactly the same, while different empires paint entirely different realities right over it.
And to do this, to really dig into this, we're pulling from a really robust stack of sources today. We have archaeological survey reports, academic studies on late Roman state violence, Ottoman tax registers.
Some really heavy academic material.
Very heavy. But out of all these high-level texts, there is one source that stands out just because of its sheer practical brilliance. It's a meticulously researched school project put together by the students of the 4th Gymnasium of Harrow.
I have to say, the work those students produced is a masterclass in applied history. I mean, they didn't just write a standard summary of the Hippodrome. They went out and acquired ancient archaeological blueprints and cadastral maps from the municipality.
Which is amazing for a school project.
It is. And then they systematically overlay those ancient floor plans directly onto the modern street grid of their own neighborhood.
They calculated the exact coordinates.
Yes, to figure out which ancient gate of the stadium corresponds to a modern apartment building entrance. Or, which section of the ancient grandstand sits directly beneath a specific neighborhood bakery.
I was looking at their methodology, and it just completely grounds the history. Imagine realizing the exact spot where you buy your morning bread is literally where a Roman emperor used to park his chariot.
It's surreal.
The students highlighted this perfectly. Thousands of modern citizens are sleeping, working, and living their daily lives directly on top of an ancient killing field and an architectural marvel, and they are completely unaware of the structural and historical foundations beneath their basements.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it forces us to ask how a structure so massive could simply vanish from the surface. Because to understand the sheer scale of what is buried under those apartment buildings, we have to start our timeline by rewinding the clock.
We're going way back.
Way back to the late 3rd century AD, specifically the year 298 AD, during the reign of Emperor Galerius.
Okay, let's unpack this character, because Galerius is fascinating. Based on the historical consensus in our sources, he comes across as a highly ambitious, tough, and fiercely pragmatic military leader. He's a key player in the Tetrarchy.
Right, the system where the Roman Empire was divided among 4 rulers to maintain control.
Exactly. And Galerius has just secured a massive, defining military victory against the Persian king Narses. He returns from this eastern campaign just loaded with plunder, prisoners, and a vastly inflated sense of his own political destiny.
He essentially views himself as a new Alexander the Great.
Totally. And riding this wave of absolute triumph, he decides he's going to establish his grand imperial seat in Thessaloniki.
The choice of Thessaloniki is really worth analyzing here because emperors rarely made capital investments based on mere whim. Galerius was, first and foremost, a military strategist. Geographically, Thessaloniki was the ultimate logistical nerve center.
Because of the port, right?
Right. Exactly. It possessed a highly active, sheltered, deep-water port on the Thermaic Gulf, which provided instant maritime access to the Aegean and the Mediterranean. But crucially, it also sat directly on the Via Egnatia.
The massive Roman superhighway?
Yes, connecting Rome and the Adriatic coast straight through to Byzantium and the eastern provinces. From this single geographic pivot point, an emperor could control the entire Balkan Peninsula, monitor the Danube frontier, and move legions rapidly either east or west.
It was the perfect strategic hub.
It was. But to solidify his status as a supreme ruler, Galerius couldn't just requisition an existing governor's mansion. The politics of the era demanded a monument, a vast architectural statement of absolute unassailable power.
And the statement he decided to build is dizzying when you actually look at the raw engineering numbers. We are talking about an entertainment complex that defies modern urban planning. The Hippodrome he constructed was roughly 450 meters long and 95 meters wide.
To visualize that, it's about 30,000 square meters of prime city real estate dedicated exclusively to chariot racing.
It's massive. The stands could accommodate upwards of 15,000 spectators at a time. It wasn't just a stadium. It was an enclosed, self-sustaining city built purely for mass spectacle.
And if you map it visually onto the modern city today, the northern tip of the stadium, where the starting gates were, started right up at modern Ippodromiou Street.
And then the long, parallel tracks stretched south.
Exactly. And the curved southern end, what they call the Sphendone, where the chariots would make those terrifying high-speed 180-degree turns that reach all the way down near modern Ippodromiou Street. It was practically touching the ancient seawall.
It was a monumental feat of engineering. The spectators in the upper tiers of the Sphendone would be watching thundering chariots race against the glittering backdrop of the Thermaic Gulf.
Just a stunning visual.
But the sheer scale of the Hippodrome is only part of the story, right? The true insight lies in its placement within the city's urban grid.
Because that placement reveals the deeply ingrained anxieties of the Roman elite at the time. The Hippodrome was not a standalone sports arena built out in the suburbs. It was the nerve center of the sprawling Galerian complex.
It was functionally and physically integrated with his massive palace, the Arch of Galerius, and the Rotunda.
Exactly. And notice where he positioned it. He built the massive eastern wall of the Hippodrome, flush against the eastern defensive walls of the city itself.
Right, and when I was reading through the sources, that seemed like a very deliberate, almost defensive choice. Why build your massive entertainment complex right up against the city fortifications?
To understand that, we really have to look at the immediate historical context. Period historians call the crisis of the 3rd century.
Which was a very bleak time.
It was brutal. For roughly 50 years before Galerius took power, the Roman Empire experienced catastrophic instability. There was military anarchy, hyperinflation, plague, constant civil war. During that half-century, there were at least 26 claimants to the imperial throne.
And almost all of them were assassinated.
Right, often by their own guards, or they were overthrown by rioting citizens. The authority of the emperor was incredibly fragile. So in that climate, a gathered crowd of 15,000 highly emotional, deeply partisan sports fans wasn't just an audience. The state viewed them as a volatile powder keg capable of sparking a revolution in an afternoon.
Which completely explains the specific design of the Emperor's Box. The architecture of this space seems entirely built around elite paranoia. The sources point specifically to the Kathisma, the imperial viewing box.
Right.
It was located on the western side of the track, looking down on the starting gates. But it wasn't just a lavish VIP seating area. The Kathisma featured a closed, heavily fortified, elevated bridge that connected the seating box directly to the inner sanctum of the imperial palace.
It is a textbook example of paranoid architecture. It reflects a profound structural distrust between the ruler and the ruled. The brilliance and the cynicism of this design is striking. The emperor could step out into the box, present himself as a living deity to the roaring masses, soak in the adoration, and preside over the games.
But the second the mood in the stadium soured...
Exactly. If a faction rioted, or if the crowd turned their anger toward the state, he didn't have to navigate through the public streets. He didn't even have to rely on guards to push through the mob. He had a perfectly secure, locked escape route straight back into his heavily garrisoned palace.
The space was meticulously engineered to all the population while simultaneously managing them, containing them, and ensuring the absolute physical security of the monarch.
It is a fusion of mass entertainment and unbreachable security.
But as we move forward in the timeline, the sources show exactly why that paranoia was completely justified. The architecture designed to contain a massive crowd would eventually be weaponized against them.
That brings us to what is arguably the darkest chapter in the history of this space.
Roughly a century later, in the year 390 AD.
By 390 AD, the political landscape had shifted drastically. Galerius is long dead. The empire is now ruled by Theodosius I, who is governing from Milan.
The social and political tension in Thessaloniki, however, is at a breaking point. It's driven by a complex mix of sports fanaticism and deep ethnic friction.
To really make sense of what happens next, we
Yeah.
have to look at chariot racing culture in late antiquity. The charioteers weren't just athletes. They were the absolute superstars of their era.
They wielded massive social influence.
Huge influence. Think of the fanaticism surrounding top-tier modern sports, but multiplied by the intense political factionalism of the Roman world, where sports guilds also functioned almost like political parties.
And one of these superstar charioteers, a massive fan favorite in Thessaloniki, is arrested on an incredibly serious charge of attempted rape.
And the dynamics of who executes that arrest are the catalyst for the entire tragedy.
Huh.
The order to imprison the charioteer comes from a man named Botharic.
Right.
Botharic holds the title of Magister Militum, making him the highest-ranking military commander of the city and the direct representative of Emperor Theodosius.
But the vital demographic detail highlighted in the sources is that Botharic is of Gothic origin.
Exactly. In a Greek-speaking, deeply proud Roman city, having a Gothic military commander enforcing the law over a local sporting hero creates immediate, explosive ethnic and cultural friction.
The Roman citizens of Thessaloniki likely viewed Botharic as an outsider, right? A barbarian given authority over them by a distant emperor.
Yes. And the local crowd is absolutely obsessed with seeing their star race in the upcoming games. They completely ignore the severity of the attempted rape charge.
They just want him back on the track.
Right. They march to Botharic and demand the charioteer's immediate release. But Botharic, acting as a magistrate upholding Roman law, refuses to bow to the mob. He keeps the charioteer locked up.
And the crowd snaps. The city descends into a massive, uncontrollable riot. The mob overwhelms the local authorities, drags Botharic into the streets, and publicly lynches him.
From a modern perspective, it looks like a sports riot that escalated into a tragic murder. But to the Roman state and to Emperor Theodosius over in Milan, this was not a riot.
It was an act of high treason.
Exactly. Open rebellion. Botharic was the physical embodiment of imperial authority in the region. Murdering him in the street was a direct, violent challenge to the emperor's right to rule.
If an emperor allows the assassination of his top general to go unpunished, the illusion of imperial control shatters.
And the empire fractures. Theodosius had to respond. But the nature of his response is what turned a political crisis into a historical atrocity.
Sometime around April or June of 390 AD, an official announcement is made in Thessaloniki that grand games are to be held at the Hippodrome.
Which is wild.
For a city that had just lynched the military commander, you would think the citizens would be highly suspicious of a sudden state-sponsored festival. But the cultural lure of the games was apparently just too strong.
They couldn't resist.
The citizens, seemingly unsuspecting, flood into the stadium. Once the stadium hits its massive capacity, with around 15,000 people packed inside the walls, the heavy wooden gates at every exit are quietly swung shut, locked, and barred from the outside.
The very walls designed to keep the spectacle contained are instantly repurposed as the walls of a massive trap.
The crowd in the stands is likely looking down at the starting gates, expecting the chariots to emerge. But instead, the gates open, and heavily armed soldiers pour out onto the sand.
And specifically, these are Gothic mercenaries, the exact same ethnic group as the murdered commander Botharic. They have their swords drawn, and they have been given absolute free rein by the state.
The logistics of what happens next are terrifying to even think about. For 3 hours, the Hippodrome is a sealed execution chamber.
The soldiers methodically move through the stands.
There is nowhere to run. The massive stone walls are insurmountable, and the locked wooden doors hold fast against the crush of the crowd. By the time the gates are finally open, the sources estimate 7,000 people have been slaughtered.
The soldiers didn't discriminate based on age, gender, or social class. It was an indiscriminate wholesale massacre inside an entertainment complex.
Because the scale of the state-sanctioned violence is so staggering, our sources spend a significant amount of time detailing a fierce, ongoing debate among modern historians regarding Theodosius's actual motives.
And it is important we look partially at these different perspectives because they fundamentally alter our understanding of imperial decision-making. We're not endorsing one view over the other here, just presenting what the experts argue.
Right, so the first major viewpoint, championed by historians like MacLean, leans heavily on the idea of impulsive emotional rule. In this view, Theodosius heard the news of Butheric's lynching, was utterly blinded by rage, and issued the order to massacre the city in a fit of pure emotion.
It paints the picture of an omnipotent ruler having a bloody temper tantrum, completely disregarding the political consequences.
Right. But that
view certainly aligns with the classic trope of the unhinged Roman emperor. But scholars like Hebblewhite push back on that narrative entirely. They argue that it ignores the timeline.
because months had passed between the murder and the massacre.
Exactly. You don't hold on to a blind, impulsive rage for months while meticulously planning a fake sporting event, secretly moving Gothic mercenaries into position, and organizing the logistics of locking down a massive stadium. For Hebblewhite, this was a cold, calculated, and deeply cynical act of exemplary punishment.
Theodosius wanted to send a chilling message to every other city in the empire. If you defy my authority and kill my commanders, I will erase a percentage of your population.
A very grim calculation.
But I would actually push back on the idea of a perfectly calculated massacre, and so does the third major theory in the sources, which is argued by historians like Dolezal and the prominent late antiquity scholar Peter Brown.
They offer a much more chaotic and, frankly, more logistically realistic military perspective.
Yeah, they argue that organizing a secret, targeted massacre of 7,000 people requires a level of operational security that is incredibly hard to maintain. Instead, they suggest the original plan was simply a mass targeted arrest.
Theodosius wanted to use the confined, locked space of the Hippodrome to round up the ringleaders of the riot.
But when 15,000 trapped people saw heavily armed Gothic mercenaries marching toward them, absolute panic ensued. The crowd likely fought back, a massive crush began, and the mercenaries, who were likely already harboring deep grievances over the murder of their Gothic commander, simply lost discipline.
They abandoned the arrest protocol and applied absolute, unrestrained military violence to clear the space.
Whichever theory you find most plausible, whether it was impulsive rage, calculated terror, or a botched military operation, the geopolitical fallout was immediate and world-changing.
Word of the atrocity quickly reached Milan, specifically the ears of Bishop Ambrose. Ambrose is appalled by the sheer brutality of the event, and his reaction fundamentally alters the power dynamic of Western civilization.
He sends a scathing letter to Emperor Theodosius, essentially excommunicating him.
He bans the emperor of the Roman Empire from receiving Holy Communion and demands that Theodosius publicly repent for his sins.
That is a staggering paradigm shift. Up until this specific moment in history, the emperor was the supreme, unquestionable authority, often viewed as a semi-divine figure. And here is Bishop Ambrose telling the most powerful military commander in the known world, "You are not welcome in this church until you beg for forgiveness."
It is the watershed moment where the rising moral authority of the Christian church successfully forces the secular imperial power to its knees.
The imagery of that submission is incredibly potent. Theodosius is forced to strip off his imperial purple robes. He dons the coarse, plain clothes of a penitent sinner, and he publicly begs for forgiveness for months.
It isn't until Christmas of 390 AD that Ambrose finally accepts his repentance and allows him back into the church. It is a stunning demonstration of a new moral and political order emerging in Europe, where state violence is suddenly subject to religious oversight.
And what happens to the Hippodrome itself after this? A space that witnessed the slaughter of 7,000 of its own citizens can't just go back to hosting chariot races the next season.
The psychological stain is just too deep.
Plus, the broader geopolitical climate of the empire is shifting. Barbarian raids from the north are becoming a constant, terrifying reality for Thessaloniki. Because the city is so terrified of these incursions, they need to bolster their defenses.
So the Grand Monument of Galerius is quite literally cannibalized.
The locals strip away the marble seating, the massive stone masonry, the statues. They repurpose the materials to reinforce the city walls and build new fortified structures.
The space that once held 15,000 cheering fans is slowly dismantled, reduced to a massive, hauntingly empty void in the eastern part of the city.
This brings us to a crucial pivot in our chronological timeline. The physical architecture of the stadium is stripped away, but the geographic footprint, that massive, long, flat expanse of dirt, remains deeply embedded in the city's urban grid.
The city literally warped around the ghost of the stadium, and that spatial memory perfectly bridges us into the next major era, the Ottoman period.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We are jumping forward now to the 15th and 16th centuries. The Roman Empire has fallen, the long Byzantine era has reshaped the city, and we are now looking at Thessaloniki under Ottoman rule.
When you examine the official Ottoman tax registers and cadastral surveys from this time, the area of the old stadium is officially recorded by the administration as Yasi Yol, which translates from Turkish as wide, flat road.
Because the central track was still this immense, flat, unbuildable open space.
Right. So new residents began constructing their homes exclusively along the outer edges of the old chariot track. They used the compacted footprint of the ruined grandstands as the foundational line for their neighborhoods.
Leaving the center empty as a massive thoroughfare. The physical shape of a Roman stadium was actually dictating the layout of an Ottoman neighborhood over 1,000 years later.
It is a profound example of geography dictating memory. The stones were gone, but the spatial boundaries remembered what the space used to be. And we see this memory preserved not just in the dirt, but in the language of the people living there.
While the Ottoman administration officially called it Yasi Yol, the local Greek Christian population stubbornly continued to refer to their specific neighborhood as Prodromi.
Now, Prodromi isn't a saint's name or a geographic descriptor. It is a direct linguistic corruption of the ancient Greek word Hippodrome.
I find that cognitive dissonance so fascinating. You have locals living in the 1500s calling their neighborhood the Hippodrome, while likely having absolutely no idea what a Roman hippodrome even looked like.
Language acts as an invisible archive. Long after the last chariot raced, long after the last stone was carried away to build a wall, the residents were subconsciously preserving the memory of the stadium every time they gave someone directions to their house. Exactly. It shows how deeply history embeds itself in daily life. And if we look closely at who was actually living in Prodromi during this era, the sources describe a highly vibrant, incredibly dense urban environment, particularly between the years 1500 and 1568. You have Christian and Muslim populations living in close proximity. The records show they aren't strictly segregated into isolated quarters. They are often sharing mixed residential courtyards and interacting daily.
The Muslim community anchors its social and religious life around the local mosque, the Aqsa Masjid.
But the demographic data from these specific decades reveals a massive, very sudden wave of Islamization occurring specifically within this exact neighborhood footprint.
The immediate assumption might be that people were converting simply to avoid the jizya, the poll tax levied on non-Muslims by the Ottoman state. But the sources reveal a much more complex, deeply economic narrative.
The spatial transformation here takes a fascinating industrial turn. The old track of blood and sand was rapidly transforming into a massive, booming textile and clothing manufacturing hub.
Because the Ottoman economy, particularly in textiles, was strictly regulated by powerful trade guilds known as esnafs.
The economic leverage these guilds held over the city's export markets was immense. While the Christian residents in the neighborhood found themselves increasingly marginalized, pushed into lower-tier, less lucrative jobs like basic shoemaking or street food vending,
the Muslim population firmly controlled the highly profitable weaving, dyeing, and tailoring guilds.
Right. To operate a loom, to sign bulk contracts, or to access the best raw materials, you needed to be part of the guild structure.
So, if you were an ambitious local artisan living in Prodromi trying to feed your family and build wealth, converting to Islam was essentially an economic survival strategy.
It wasn't just a religious shift, it was a bureaucratic necessity to enter these elite weaving guilds. The geography of the space that once hosted imperial chariot games was now hosting an industrial boom.
By the 18th century, this exact same footprint is internationally known for churning out high-end luxury cottons and highly sought-after bath fabrics.
The contrast is striking. The thundering roar of Roman chariots, the roar of a bloodthirsty crowd, and the horrifying screams of the 390 AD massacre have been completely replaced by the rhythmic, industrious, mechanical quacking of hundreds of wooden looms.
The space has effectively healed itself through industry and commerce. But as we transition into the modern era, we see that the city didn't just layer industry over the trauma of the space. It layered faith over it as well.
There's a strong thread of Byzantine and Orthodox continuity here that sets the stage for the next major event.
The sources map out how new churches, like Nea Panagia and Saints Constantine and Helen, were built in the immediate vicinity, often resting directly on much older, ancient Roman foundations.
But the most poignant detail in this religious tapestry is the arrival of a deeply significant artifact. A 14th century Byzantine icon known as Ipanton Elpis, which translates to the hope of all.
The journey of that icon is essential context. It wasn't originally from Thessaloniki. Following the Greco-Turkish War, there was a massive mandatory population exchange in 1922.
Over 1 million Greek Orthodox citizens were uprooted from Asia Minor and forced to resettle in Greece. Thessaloniki's population exploded practically overnight.
These refugees brought their trauma, their culture, and their most sacred artifacts, like the Hope of All icon, directly into neighborhoods like the footprint of the old Hippodrome.
Over the decades, as these refugees integrated, this specific icon became the ultimate spiritual refuge for the local residents. Whenever disaster struck, whether it was plagues, the economic devastation of the world wars, or geological instability, the people of the neighborhood would flock to this icon seeking protection.
That deep reliance on faith in the face of natural disaster serves as a chilling bridge to the next point in our timeline, because history, in this specific location, has a way of violently reasserting itself.
We are shifting focus now to a day that fundamentally altered the psychology of modern Thessaloniki, June 20th, 1978.
A massive 6.5 magnitude earthquake strikes northern Greece. The shaking is violent, the destruction across the region is widespread, and the terror in the city is absolute.
When the dust finally settles and the grim work of counting the casualties concludes, the official death toll within the sprawling city of Thessaloniki stands at 49 people.
Any loss of life in a natural disaster is tragic. But as analysts looking at the data, a highly specific, chilling statistical anomaly emerges from the municipal records. Out of those 49 total deaths across the entire city, 37 of them occurred in one single location.
37 people died due to the complete catastrophic collapse of one specific 8-story apartment building.
And the location of that building is the crux of our entire deep dive. It was standing right on Hippodrome Square. This massive modern concrete structure had been built directly on top of the buried, structurally weakened ancient stone foundations of the Roman Hippodrome.
When the seismic waves hit, the modern engineering and the ancient subterranean ruins interacted catastrophically. The ground essentially failed, bringing the entire 8-story building down in a matter of seconds.
This disaster forces us to examine how modern urban societies process catastrophic, localized trauma. The reaction of the city wasn't confined to discussions about engineering failures, soil liquefaction, or building codes.
The psychological reawakening in Thessaloniki was immediate, profound, and deeply rooted in the historical memory of the space. Almost overnight, deep-seated urban legends woke up.
The collective consciousness of the city immediately drew a straight line through 1,600 years of history. They connected the 37 modern souls lost in the concrete rubble of that apartment building to the 7,000 ancient souls slaughtered by Gothic mercenaries on those exact same geographic coordinates in 390 AD.
People in the coffee shops and the markets, they started whispering. They claimed the ground was cursed. They said the earth beneath Hippodrome Square was still soaked in Roman blood, and that the 1978 earthquake was some kind of delayed dark retribution or a physical manifestation of ancient evil.
This raises an important question. From a sociological standpoint, we have to unpack why humans do this. Why do we invent curses?
When a community is faced with the blind, unfair, and utterly senseless violence of a natural disaster, the human mind struggles to accept the randomness of geology. We desperately seek meaning. We need a narrative structure to process grief.
Connecting the earthquake of 1978 to the massacre of 390 AD is a phenomenon known as apophenia.
Oh, right, finding connections between unrelated things. But more importantly, it is a psychological coping mechanism. By blaming an ancient curse, you are attempting to make sense of the horrific void left by the disaster. You are giving the random tragedy a reason, even if that reason is rooted in myth and ancient bloodshed.
It is easier to stomach a historical curse than the terrifying reality that the ground beneath your feet can just randomly open up and destroy you without cause.
That analysis completely changes the framing of the urban legend. It isn't just superstition. It's a community trying to survive its own grief.
But what I find most uplifting about this timeline is how the city officially responded to that grief. They had this empty plot of land on Hippodrome Square after the rubble was finally cleared. They didn't just hand this cursed piece of prime real estate back to commercial developers to pour new concrete and build another apartment block.
They recognized the heavy compounding trauma of the space. They chose a path of profound urban reconciliation.
Today, if you visit the exact geographic spot where that 8-story apartment building collapsed, you won't find residential balconies or commercial storefronts. You will find the Thessaloniki History Center.
The poetic symbolism of this municipal decision is magnificent. Think about what this specific nexus represents. It is the site of absolute destruction, both the pinnacle of human tyranny in 390 AD and the apex of geological violence in 1978.
And the city deliberately transformed this exact nexus of death into its official vault of memory. It houses the city's archives, historical documents, and research facilities. They systematically planted understanding, education, and memory directly on top of the dirt where trauma once ruled.
It is the ultimate triumph of a city over its own dark history.
So after mentally excavating 2,000 years of transformation, the natural question for anyone listening right now is, where are the actual ruins today? If I walk through modern Thessaloniki, can I actually see this massive 450-meter-long Roman giant?
The answer is a testament to the surreal, often compromised nature of modern urban archaeology. You can see fragmented glimpses, but the giant remains largely invisible, trapped by the city that grew over it.
If you check the local municipal guides, they describe this incredibly surreal coexistence of different eras. If you go to the recently renovated Venerian Square near the Neaponagia Church, you can look down and see a tiny, neatly protected sliver of the ancient stone track. It has been carefully preserved and lit for the public.
But the real story, the massive bulk of this engineering marvel, is hidden entirely behind closed doors. Because the city grew relentlessly over the centuries, particularly during the rapid urbanization of the 20th century, the massive foundational remnants of the ancient grandstands, the huge blocks of masonry that supported 15,000 screaming fans, were never fully excavated and removed.
The cost and logistical impossibility of pausing city development to dig up a 450-meter stadium meant that the ruins were simply built over, and in many cases, physically built into the modern structures.
This is the detail that sticks with me the most. The ancient walls are literally embedded inside the modern architecture.
Specifically, the archaeological guides point to 7 Ippodromiou Street. If you manage to get inside the light wells of that modern apartment building, those dark, narrow, vertical shafts in the center of the building designed to let a little bit of air and light into the interior bathrooms and kitchens, the structural walls of those light wells are made entirely of ancient Roman hippodrome masonry.
And it gets even more surreal. If you explore the dark, unroofed spaces, the basements and the back alleys squeezed between Demetriou Gunari, Filikas Estereas, and Agapita streets, you'll find 2,000 years of Roman majesty and horrific bloodshed sitting in total silence right next to modern, rusting heating oil tanks, poured concrete foundational walls, and standard PVC sewage pipes.
It is a fragmented giant, permanently trapped in the boiler rooms and basements of the city. To synthesize everything we have discussed across this timeline, the core takeaway from our sources is that history is never static. It isn't just a list of dates trapped in a textbook or a museum display.
It is a pulsating, active mosaic buried just beneath our asphalt. Whether it manifests as massive marble foundations dictating the curve of an Ottoman road, or as forgotten urban legends helping modern citizens process the trauma of an earthquake, the past constantly dictates our present.
It determines where we lay our foundations, how we structure our economies, how we cope with natural disasters, and how we mourn our dead. The geographic canvas of Thessaloniki remained exactly the same. Only the paint applied by each successive generation changed.
I think that perfectly encapsulates the journey of this space.
Mm-hmm.
And we really have to give a final nod of appreciation to those student researchers from the 4th Gymnasium of Herlo. Their project mapping the ancient gates to the modern bakeries and apartments is what grounds this massive, sweeping history into something tangible. They reminded us just how incredibly alive the dirt under our shoes really is.
Absolutely. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to take with you long after this deep dive ends. We now know that an imperial stadium half a kilometer long, capable of holding 15,000 streaming fans and witnessing the slaughter of 7,000 citizens, can be so utterly erased by time and urban sprawl that it becomes nothing more than the dusty basement wall of a modern apartment block next to a sewage pipe.
It's humbling.
Tomorrow morning, during your hurried commute to work, when you are gripping your coffee and rushing to your next meeting, I want you to look down at the pavement. Look at the cracks in the asphalt. What invisible monuments, what forgotten imperial triumphs, and what unspoken human tragedies are you walking over without even knowing it? The echoes of the past are literally everywhere, radiating up through the concrete, waiting for anyone willing to stop, look down, and listen. Keep questioning the hidden layers of your world, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.